of meticulous research and analysis by our team of experts who you will hear from today. This report provides a comprehensive overview of opportunities that Nigeria will face in the coming year, 2025. It is designated to empower our clients and Nigerians in general with the knowledge that they need, with the knowledge and tools that they need to navigate the complex economic landscape in Nigeria and make informed decisions. We hope that this outlook will serve as a valuable resource for policymakers, stakeholders, businesses, and investors. We are committed to continuing to provide high-quality research and analysis to help shape Nigeria's future. Thank you once again for sharing your time with us and for joining us today. We look forward to an insightful discussion from our panelists and a productive year ahead. I know it's early to wish you a productive year ahead, but yeah, we look forward to a productive year ahead. Thank you.
Please, a round of applause. I don't know if Basil is ready. Basil, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's the next item that we have on the agenda is presentation of the key forecasts from the Outlook 2025 report. And this will be done by Mr. Basil Abia, who is a co-founder of Veriv Africa. Please, a round of applause for him.
Our mission. That was to go.
Are you ready? Do we have the slides? Brilliant. In the meantime, while we're waiting for Basil to start his presentation, please move forward. Please, a round of applause for him.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, I want to apologize for starting very late. Not to throw my dear country under the bus, but we have a very pervasive culture that we need to find a way and expunge, and that culture is LACOM. We're a data research company, so I can give you the data. We're expecting at least 100 people, and at the very least, we're expecting the folks to come quite early, at least 12:45 to 12:15. But it's just past 1:30 now, and folks are still on their way. So hopefully, I'm not hard on my dear country and its beautiful country people, but unfortunately, this is a culture we have to be able to find a way to report to. Secondly, and most importantly, I want to say a big welcome to all of you who have come here quite early, I must say. Thank you for coming to this occasion. And for those who are currently following our proceedings, be it via Zoom or on YouTube live stream, I just want to say a big thank you for joining in. For those of you who tuned into our channel segment on Business Morning earlier this morning, around 10 a.m. if I'm not mistaken, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully you were able to get the crux of our outlook for Nigeria's economy in 2025. Most importantly, just before I commence, just an excerpt of our outlook. I have to give you some core details about Nigeria in 2024 and of course 2023. As you do know, we're going through what some, and I do not mean this in a pejorative way, but a chunk of economists the world over are describing what we have experienced in the last 24 months, so to say, as a shock therapy economics. And for those who understand what I mean, shock therapy economics, of course, is naira, Nigerian naira, in unused inventory stock. So inventory stock that cannot be sold solely because, as you do know, demand just collapses when price increases. That is a huge, huge number. And furthermore, as you do know, of course, the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria have also said that 35 to 40% of production costs of their members are actually drawn from energy. So if you're having a situation where, aside from PMS spiking up and diesel being volatile regardless of the interventions we've started to see from Dangote Refinery, we also have, do not forget, of course, the stratification of our electricity consumption into bands. Band A, Band B, Band C, and Band D. And most Band A's are high-level or high-earning residentials, and of course the industrials. So they're having to take in that particular shock in the last 1 year for market-driven, cost-reflective tariffs that the government is currently implementing on a phase-by-phase basis. Now, the problem, however, is when you're doing cost-reflective tariffs, there has to be another subsequent action happening. And that action is you're increasing generation and you're also increasing your transmission threshold. Apologies for that again. Unfortunately, we are just not doing that. As you do know the data, and a number of us in this room are having that experience. My mother just flew from Yola today to surprise me. I was in tears all through. But one thing I do know, using my mother as an example, is that she experienced 2 weeks without electricity from the grid in Yola some 3 weeks ago, and that affected productivity. Luckily for me, with the foresight, I had no idea why I was pushed to do it. Earlier this year, I decided to switch my mother off grid, and she didn't feel the pain. But my mother is just one out of 217 million people, out of 120, or if I'm not mistaken, 150 million Nigerians who are in northern Nigeria who experienced that particular shock. I'll give you a personal example out of grid at all in northern Nigeria. I have a friend of mine who is a plant manager with an FMCG that I've not mentioned, manufacturing plant, of course, in Kano. Kano, of course, as you know, is the manufacturing hub of northern Nigeria, the economic nerve center of northern Nigeria. They were hardest hit actually in northern Nigeria throughout that period. And he said they're spending 10 million naira every day on diesel. That's not sustainable. And you can understand what I mean by price transmission when your favorite biscuit company are having to spend 10 million naira daily on diesel. I'm sorry to say, you're not going to get your biscuit for 50 naira again. And when next you want to visit your little nieces and nephews, you have to increase your budget for them. This is exactly what is happening. So yeah, our outlook is to, first and foremost, highlight what the science of our economic analysis is, and by that I mean the macroeconomic model. And then secondly, also prefer solutions. So we're not here to all talk about problems all through. We're not going to bore you with that. I think Nigeria has taught us enough lessons about how bad the situation is, and I'm going to do just that. We're going to just prefer solutions more. So forgive me if I skim through most of the slides. I'm going to spend most of my time on policy recommendations and spend most of my time on state governments and state governors. So sorry that you have some favorite state governors of yours. I might be putting them under the bus today. It's important because they simply have to do the heavy lifting now. It's time to get to the work of governance. Can we? Yeah, this is my favorite quote when it comes to statistics. It's by a British statistician, and he says, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So there's a very high chance, very, very high chance that all of our projections we will not be accurate at all in every single scenario of our projections. But I must tell you that I have some, well, I'm not a pastor, but I have some witnesses to my prophetic forecasting last year when I was with an organization very dear to me during their end-of-year strategy session. A couple of them are here, so they completely understand what I'm trying to say. I spent 1 hour projecting a number of things that was going to happen in Nigeria in 2023. A lot of people felt I was very negative, called me names on X when I posted some screenshots of the projections. They called me names. I remember in March when I said that the Naira rebounding in terms of its value close to 1,000 Naira per dollar at that time. I remember being called names, and the only thing I said was that the fundamentals just doesn't support for a rebound of the Naira or a rebound of a number of our macroeconomic indicators. And well, it's quite unfortunate when you're proven right, especially when it's affecting people. But the science, again, was spot on, and it is even far worse than what I projected. So we are going to be very conservative with our projections. We're strictly using a combination of science and nuances. And just because George E.P. Box tells us that the models can be wrong, they are still useful for you, for your planning for next year, if you're a business person, if you're a policy analyst, for your planning for your pitch decks, or your presentations when you're having high-level policy meetings. And of course, if you're just an everyday Nigerian who's really concerned about your lived conditions, this can give you some frameworking for 2025. Yeah, we had a slight, I wouldn't call it a decline in growth. The global economy still grew. As you do know, the global economy is still rebounding from the effects of the pandemic that happened in 2020. Of course, started off in China in 2019, late 2019. Last year it was 3.3%. Today slowed a bit to it's going to slow a bit to 3.2. We get that forecast source, of course, from the IMF Global Outlook, as you do know. The IMF Global Outlook are predicting that Nigeria's GDP is going to just be around 190 billion US dollars. Our GDP size at some point used to be around 500 billion US dollars, but now it's at 190 billion US dollars. There's some arguments, core arguments that I remember our conversation on our simulation with Amara yesterday. It's like, why do you want to framework or benchmark economic growth using a currency like the dollar, especially since, of course, we're in Nigeria. But yeah, those arguments are going to come. Amara, that isn't Amara's argument, by the way. Amara is just playing the devil's advocate of certain arguments that might come when we're talking about IMF's outlook for Nigeria's GDP by the end of the year. Yeah, one of the reasons why there was a bit of slag in GDP growth, of course, as you do know, China has a big impact when it comes to growth globally. They have been going through significant, what they particularly call the China slow growth era. And we've had geopolitical tensions all across. You know some of them, and some of them I can re-highlight here. Major geopolitical tension, especially, is the infighting, well, not the infighting, but the aggressiveness, the aggression of Israel as it concerns the tripartite connection between Palestine, Lebanon. This is weak a bit. Don't worry, I used to pretend to be a pastor when I was a kid, so I did this. Yeah, okay. Can I put it? Sincere apologies. I'm not going to command the Naira to rise. I apologize. If you were expecting me to command the Naira to rise, I'm not going to. I don't have the prophetic guidance in that regard. But yeah, another reason, again, for the slow growth, as you do know, is geopolitical tensions affecting certain nerve centers. The Russian war with Ukraine has taken another dimension. Aggressiveness of Israel towards the tripartite connection countries between, well, Palestine is, of course, I do believe it's a state and has a right to statehood, but yeah, Palestine, Iran, and of course Lebanon. That infighting is going to even do further damage to, especially when it comes to energy, hydrocarbons geopolitically next year. And that frameworking obviously pointed out to what we were. Interest rate environment, as you do know, at some point towards the middle of the year, most global economists started to either relax their monetary policy rates or just, again, in macroeconomics, like they say, the do-nothing theory. They did nothing. And we saw high inflation rates in the UK and the US swing down. The UK's double-digit inflation rate dropped down to even half of 10%, 5%, and lower than that now. Even our neighborhood, well, they're not really our neighbors, to be honest, but they're like our neighbors, the Ghanaians. Ghanaians have halved their headline inflation rate. Last year it was really terrible, but they've halved it exactly in 1 year for a number of reasons, mostly because monetary policy transmission is quite effective in that macroeconomic environment. And what I mean by that is whenever you raise the interest rate, how effective can that hike in interest rate be in stemming high inflation? Unfortunately, in Nigeria, we've had close to 50%, not close, exactly 50% rate of increase in our MPRs in the last 1 year. And unfortunately, we're still in the middle of our 30s when it comes to headline inflation. Food inflation at some point in June was 40%. That is a wartime number, I must add. And globally, even though we understand that global growth slowed a bit due to high inflation in a number of areas, there was, towards the H2, that's the second half of the year, there was a moderation in those inflationary rates. Can we move? Just in case you're concerned, I know some people are trying to say, Ogbeni, tell us what the Naira will be against the dollar. I don't know why I'm reading about China and Lebanon. The point of it is that you have to always apply the first principles thinking to whatever you do. And in the field of macroeconomic analysis, policy analysis, you have to do the fundamentals. We do not live in isolation. A lot of the things that are happening right now in our country is affected by exogenous shocks or external shocks, and these are some of the fundamentals to be able to highlight. Can we move to the next slide? Global debt, of course, continues to spike up, 315 trillion US dollars. As you do know, most of sub-Saharan Africa is bordered by debt. We really have a lot of work to do. I will permit me to share a thinking that I really will push as an argument. It's from a former senior colleague of mine and current mentor, Ma Ekere. She is the senior research fellow at CC, and I know a number of CC staff are here, ex-CC alums are here. I'm also an ex-CC alum, and by CC I mean Center for the Study of the Economies of Africa, founded by Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. There's a round of applause for Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. More than half of us are where we are because of her singular thinking with setting up a think tank in CC and setting up a polling company in NOI Polls. That's just incredible thinking. These are the kind of infrastructure and legacy that you provide that even when you leave Earth, you will be able to see that impact from your thinking. So a round of applause to her for that. Like I mentioned, very kind mom. Like I mentioned, high interest rates, of course, were one of the reasons why the global economy slowed down a bit, of course, by just a percentile or a semi-percentile. And as you do know, the burden of degrowth or the burden of the lack of growth globally is almost always taken by sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, that's where the burden of inflation even is. I'll give you another additional statistic. 14 out of the 44 sub-Saharan African countries. And just to give you a description, sub-Saharan African countries are anything from Sudan, not South Sudan, anything from Sudan downwards. So North Africa sometimes are being segmented geopolitically and economically as well. But yeah, 14 out of 40 sub-Saharan African countries currently bear the burden of food inflation in the world. And what I mean by that is double-digit inflation rates, so anything from 10% and above. And as you do know, Nigeria's food inflation rate is at 37.7%. And as you do know, of course, our headline inflation rate, the calculation methodology for that, 51% of that component is from food inflation. So for all of the public servants in the House, policy makers in the House, those, of course, in the audience who are watching, international analysts and development workers, it's very important to highlight that for us to be able to stem the growth or be able to spike up growth globally, we're going to have to fight food inflation in diverse ways. And we, Veriv Africa, we're very pivotal with the joint technical partners with the IFC of the World, the IFC of the World Bank, supporting technically, of course, the Agriculture Summit Africa that just concluded yesterday in Abuja. Yeah. So we're doing really socially impactful work in that regard. Can we move to the next? Global trade increased. Well, technically it hasn't concluded, but global trade, of course, is going to increase by, it's going to increase to, if I'm not mistaken, 32 trillion US dollars. Again, the source of that projection, of course, doesn't come from us. It comes from the IMF Global Outlook. That, I think, should be very much prominent amongst knowledge producers in the room, and I see quite a number of them. And knowledge producers, of course, who are live streaming right now. Can we move to the next stage? So, didn't want to delve too much into geopolitics and the effect and of course the global economy and its effect on the Nigerian economy, not only for now but also for 2025. But it's important, again, using first principles thinking to be able to use that as a base and then move forward. We're going to have a Q&A session, and I'm really excited that the rest of the team will be able to give more depth, do more justice, crystallize more of the numbers with regards to the effect of the global economy on Nigeria's economy. But right now, it's time to come back home. And what can I say? I think I gave a very good intro to just what the Nigerian macroeconomic space is witnessing. I don't need to tell a lot of anecdotes. I think every single Nigerian here, using colloquial parlance, we dey feel am. We're not feeling it in a good way. We're feeling it in a very terrible way. So shout out to Davido, but our feeling is not a nice one, in all honesty. Liberalization of the local currency, as of course you do know. Can we go back to the past slide? I just want to highlight something before we move. Yeah, the removal of subsidies, the regulation of prices, attempts at streamlining taxes, which will actually happen next year when we have the economic stabilization bills passed to law. And one of that particular economic stabilization bill is the one that unifies all of revenue generation under the National Revenue Group, or is it Commission? National Revenue Service, sorry, and NRS. So expect to have far more lawyers who are now tax consultants next year. That's my prediction. I hope that in 2025 December, you guys come and say, yeah. Myself too, I'm a tax consultant. And I'm like, please, I've paid my taxes. Can we move to the next one? Sorry. Yeah, we sustained growth, positive growth. I think I was on my second cup of coffee when I wrote the slides together with, I won't call my other colleague who worked today. Positive growth, but yeah, growth was badly needed, especially after the 8 years of erstwhile Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari. We needed some form of growth, but this is not convincing growth. We need to start doing 5% and above. We did, in Q2, we did 3.1. We're going to do roughly 3.2 on aggregate when the year comes to an end, according to, of course, our own forecast, as well as that of the International Monetary Fund. And yes, growth was driven by services, although services are also feeling the heat. For those who do not know, the NESG, the National Economic Summit Group, together with Systemic IBTC, if I'm not mistaken, as well as another data point as well that came from the CBN, they have indicators, or they have basically been working on indicators to highlight just how much the services sector, the manufacturing sector, are being bedeviled by the crunching macroeconomic conditions. I can reveal that the CBN index for the manufacturing industry reduced from 17.5% to 14.5%. Those index, of course, takes in a number of items and puts them under a basket to highlight the performance of the manufacturing sector. And we can see the GDP growth rate as well, spiking up slightly slow. So very sluggish growth in all honesty. Yeah, we'll move to the next one. And of course, as you do know, headline inflation started to stabilize right after the heat period of June, July. When I mean heat period, I mean the crunch of macroeconomic conditions then started to stabilize, but unfortunately, with the further increase of PMS from 900 to over 1,000, some people actually in northwest Nigeria pay 1,400 per liter. That's actually anecdotal evidence from some of my calls. So it's quite unfortunate. But yeah, we saw some stabilization at some point in Q3 and Q4 now that we're in. We have seemed to have picked up a lag in terms of headline and food inflation. We think that will continue. So basically not a back and forth per se, but a slower rate of increase. A slower rate of increase in inflation is going to happen moving forward next year. That's simply because all of the conduit pipes for production, all of the factors for improving production, they're taking quite a while to be able to take stage. And I'll highlight what I mean by taking stage in that sense. From energy to the current pressures, of course, that we're currently having with MPR. MPR not being the tool that it's supposed to be in terms of stemming inflation, and the reason for that is the connection, the transmission between MPR and stemming inflation is very weak, and there's a lot of, well, not a lot, but at least I know that I've read about 9 regression analysis research published on the international journals by Nigerian economists who have highlighted just how weak our MPR is when it comes to stemming inflation. Shall we move? Great. Like I mentioned, of course, it's very difficult to see how the MPR is going to work in stemming inflation. It just hasn't worked. Using, again, further regression data when it comes to Nigeria, and time series analysis as well, it takes close to 2.5 years for MPR hikes, sustained MPR hikes, to be able to take effect. So basically, the transmission lag, for those who are macroeconomists or did some form of monetary economics in university, you do know that there's what they call the transmission lag. That's basically the timeline or the duration before a policy, especially a monetary policy, is able to take effect and reduce inflation. I think we saw forms of that in Q3 with the NPR, with that a bit reduction in inflation or slowdown in inflation. But like I said again, because Nigeria's inflation isn't primarily monetary driven, but actually structural, and I'll mention what the factors for that structural inflation is. Our very poor energy supply. We are quite possibly one of the energy poor countries of the world. Aside from that, of course, we have very structural issues when it comes to logistics infrastructure. I'll tell you a stat that is really scary. 90% of all of the logistical burden in Nigeria is borne by our roads, and only 40,000 kilometers out of our 200,000. Chisom thinks, she doesn't think, she gets a source, another source of hers where our road network is about 180,000 kilometers. There's also another source that I like to use that is about 200,000. But we all do know basically that we have a very low capacity utilization rate when it comes to our road network, but also a very large swath of our roads are unpaved or just in deplorable conditions. I remember growing up as a kid and watching NTA. By the way, my mom can corroborate. I was an NTA junkie, while most of my peers were Cartoon Network junkies. And I just was fascinated by the fact that federal government would spend 1 hour doing a documentary on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway and the work that they're doing to fix it. I'm due at least 3 children now at this age, and Lagos-Ibadan Expressway hasn't been certified completed. So that should tell you a lot of the problems when it comes to governance and infrastructure. These logistical burdens affect growth, and that's why we simply cannot see our outlook as positive as some folks will be able to say. We simply cannot see how and where we're going to see growth past the 3% real growth GDP rate in that sense. Shall we go? Trade balance has, obviously, as you do know, of course, started to increase, especially when it comes to non-oil exports. We've noticed a significant rise, actually, in that activity. A lot of that has to do with the devaluation of the Naira. There are core arguments, and I'm sure the arguments will be brought to fore here during the Q&A session, on whether the devaluation of the Naira is very good for our non-oil export sector and our manufacturing sector. I will tell you categorically before we go there, I don't believe it. Let's go. So heading to 2025, what are some of the factors that we factored in our outlook? We had to be able to look first at the globe. Again, first principles thinking. What are the fundamentals to be able to push your assumptions for the macroeconomy? We have to look globally, and then we are still going to have increased geopolitical conflicts. A Trump presidency also means that we're going to see an inflationary trend in the US, as well as globally too, because he's going to want to increase tariffs on Chinese exports. Chinese imports into the US consumption market. And we do know, of course, that those tariffs transmit directly to the pocket of the people. So with that rate, we could see some activity. We will see reduced activity in interest when it comes to Nigeria's equities market, especially when it comes to government securities. As you do know, and I'll explain with a little bit of depth, in 2018 to 2019, when inflation wasn't really high and when the yields per annum for US government bonds were lower than 2% per annum, we noticed an increased appetite for emerging economies' government securities, as risky as they were. To corroborate that fact, a recent one-year Treasury bill yield for Nigeria is given 29.9% per annum. So that's a very incentivizing number, but it's still not incentivizing for most foreign portfolio investors. And I do know a number of foreign portfolio investors and their analysts and funds, international funds from London, who said they were going to listing in there, so they can corroborate exactly what I'm saying. When that activity, when yields per annum are very low, there is increased appetite in the Nigerian equity space. And we saw that in 2019 when Nigeria got FPI money, foreign portfolio investment money, as high as $9 billion US. We've been doing close to $3 billion in the last 12 months, mostly because, again, of that increased activity in MPR hikes. So basically what we're saying is that Donald Trump is going to make sure that yields per annum for government-based bonds would be very nice for FPI guys, and they will not really look to us because we're quite risky. Our securities and bonds are quite risky. So we've sorted out the elections, like I said, with the Donald Trump presidency. Can we move to the next one? Yeah, I don't want to talk about Donald Trump again. Can we move? Have I explained the China-US conundrum with inflation and tariff wars? I think that works. We have 71 pages, by the way, so if you want in-depth coverage, once the QR code is here, you can spend as much time as possible to read in-depth. I was warned yesterday that I should not be a pastor. I should just be a number 9 striker like Haaland. Just stay in the 18-yard box and shoot. Victor, are you passing me the ball? Yeah, I've mentioned all of this. As you do know, of course, Ukraine, Middle East, all of these geopolitical tensions would take in a bit. Shall we? Wow, this person really likes Trump. Next slide. Yeah, I've mentioned all of this. Shall we? So back to Nigeria, I think this is probably where most phones would rise up to take shots. This is our outlook for GDP, real GDP, of course, growth rate for 2025. Let me explain the approach from our macroeconometric model. We look at 3 different scenarios. We look at the best case scenario. We look at the base case scenario. Base case basically means business as usual, little to no external changes, even from policy or outcomes or indicators. And then we have the worst case scenario. That's when things go really bad. Who wants to know what the Naira is going to be against the dollar next year? I want to know. Can you guess? 2,500. Wow. Who else can guess? 2,000 what? 2,000 on the dot. This is a round of applause for Timei. She got it right. 1,900 to 2,000 Naira should be the worst case scenario when it comes to exchange rate for Naira against the dollar, based, of course, on our macroeconometric model. And what are the things? What are the ingredients to this particular model? Like we had highlighted, there's a chance that geopolitical tensions would, or the lack of it actually, would reduce the global oil prices. There's also a chance that the Trump presidency would further increase at very dramatic rate the production of oil and gas in the US, especially from sources that are really controversial. Shale oil, fracking, as you do know, of course, affecting Native American populations. Donald Trump has already mentioned he's going to do a lot of that, doubling down when it comes to production. And so if you do production to the level where there's a glut and OPEC has to start scrambling around, oil prices definitely start to tank. And if we have oil prices below $70 per barrel, there's a high chance that that is going to transmit to shrinking government revenues, and that shrinking government revenues is going to affect our productivity levels, and that productivity levels is going to increase our inflation, and inflation is going to what? Inflation is going to reduce aggregate consumption, and when aggregate consumption reduces, the aggregate quantification of the economic activity for a year, for a country, reduces, and that's exactly what the GDP does. I know that there's a potential that we're going to have arguments, even from the audience on the internet. those who are currently live streaming, they might ask questions about whether we should still use GDP as an accurate quantifier of economic activity. Well, that's for the arguments to show face, and I think we have a team capable of addressing some of those concerns. So, under our best case scenario, we expect the 3.64 GDP growth rate. One of our key assumptions, no, please, let's go back. Okay, yeah, let's just remove my face. I know I'm really handsome. I mean, my mother is responsible for that. She's yeah, but not yet. So shall we look at the reason why we think our best case scenario is going to be 3.64? Core reason for that, or a core assumption for that, again, is increase in geopolitical tensions that affect oil production, that also forces, of course, oil prices to increase. So best case scenario, if we do $90 to a barrel in the international oil markets, and we stick to our 1.7 million, our 1.6 to 1.7 million barrels, crude oil production per day, there's a high chance that we can get 3.64. That, of course, that growth will be driven by the services sector and the oil and gas sector. We could see increased activity in mining, particularly artisanal mining. The licensing process has been really positive, and a number of players, a number of medium-scale players in the industry are also posting very good results. My favorite, of course, Thor Explorations. The guys behind Segulola Gold Mine, of course, are doing very good numbers. I know that last year they were able to post, well, not last year, in 2022, they were able to post $143 million in EBITDA and about $70 million in full profits. That reduced a bit in 2023, of course, as you do know, because of the shocks and the devaluation, but they're still doing $70 million or more in EBITDA. And there are many other players just like them posting good results. Some good news. 1 month ago, they released results of their mineralization studies on their lithium prospecting area in Oyo West, and the results are quite positive. I think, not that I think, the result is basically saying that they can get commercial quantity lithium in abundance. As you do know, of course, there's a lot of activity in lithium mining and lithium processing in north-central Nigeria, particularly in Nasarawa and Plateau states, and that we expect to continue to increase next year. However, there's some factors that we infuse for our worst case and base case scenario, and one of such factors is insecurity affecting some of these productive units, including agriculture, which is also a pivotal driver of economic activity. Agriculture currently does 22.5% contribution to the GDP, as you do know. 90% of those folks who engage in agricultural activity are rural smallholder farmers, and these rural smallholder farmers are now being bedeviled by a multiplicity of violence and conflict. Last week, a new international terror group came into Nigeria, and they're going to change the dynamic whether we like it or not. My first published research, by the way, was on Boko Haram, so I studied the origins of Boko Haram. I have my co-researcher here in the room, researcher all the way from Germany, Leipzig. His name, of course, Kinsley Jima, and we worked on that. I remember taking trips to Maiduguri to be able to study those strengths. Again, Lukawara, the group that just came in from Niger Republic, are showing similar signs of a Boko Haramic activity. Of course, we hope not, but you have to be able to infuse some of these outcomes in your assumptions for next year. Worst case scenario, 2.53% growth in worst case scenario. Basically, like I mentioned, one exogenous shock for that worst case scenario is if global oil prices tank to below $70 per barrel. Many other outcomes too can be infused if the Dangote refinery do not get to supply most of the real sector with energy for logistics. That is going to affect productivity. Again, let me mention, 90% of our logistics, both vehicular, goods-wise, and human-wise, is carried out by our roads. Our roads, and that is slowing down time when it comes to travel. And when you slow down time when it comes to travel, when you don't have vehicles that have cold chain technology capability, what happens? Post-harvest losses. We're doing post-harvest losses as high as 80% when it comes to tomato and 50% when it comes to other perishables along that value chain or crop value chain. So with these post-harvest losses, you have productivity issues in terms of the food that gets to the demand. And what happens? Food inflation, of course, increases. And like I mentioned much earlier, 51% of our calculation methodology that MBS deploys for calculating headline inflation is driven by that food inflation. So you can connect the dots in that regard. Can we move? I'm behind time, so I'm just going to push faster than normal. Wow. Sincere apology. I'm 15 minutes behind time. I'm really going to be a pastor one day, you know. Not really. No. I'm just going to go to politics, please. So yeah, give me 5 minutes to wrap everything up. This is our inflation rate forecast for 2025. Again, we do the bull, the beige, and the bear. Bull basically is best case scenario. In good conditions, we're going to do 31% headline inflation on aggregate throughout 2025. Still not a good number, but it's lower than 37% or 35%. Base is business as usual. Nothing really changes. We continue to live the way we live. That will slightly be higher than normal. And then, of course, we have the highest number. We expect headline inflation to, at the end, that's the last quarter, 40.93%. But base level, we can be able to account for 36% in terms of aggregate headline inflation rate. Can we move? Exchange rate is expected to remain volatile. As you can see here, of course, we're expecting base case, of course, for the naira against the dollar to be 1,860. And then on the performance, one of those reasons, again, it's also exogenous. It's just if we don't get higher oil prices, that's going to affect our revenues. And then there's a transmission of that, of course, to Forex performance. Worst case scenario for the dollar against the naira is 1,930 naira to 2,000 naira. I know a lot of people are begging that that is not going to be the case. I will put you in prayers when I start my fasting in January next year. Shall we go? I'm supposed to spend a lot more time in recommendations, and I know I highlighted the importance of that. But I think let me pick one particular way that really is personal to me. When you don't apply context to classical textbook economics, you have a conundrum, and I think we're in that conundrum right now when it comes to monetary tightening. Yes, we know that money supply growth is a huge factor with our really stringent macroeconomic conditions. Yes, I know that there are some arguments that has been on for and has been gathering steam that whenever there's FAC allocation given to states at the month, the state governors with their lackeys are using that naira from the FAC allocation to go and mop up as much US dollars and as much euros as possible in the market. That is driving artificial price increase when it comes to eating the exchange rate, especially the informal exchange rate market. And then, as you do know, there is also a swift exchange rate pass-through. For macroeconomics folks, you know exactly what I mean. But for folks who do not know what that means, it's basically saying that exchange rate would hit and affect inflation, especially when it comes to end consumer goods that are imported. For folks who are still hoping to buy a car, you know that anytime you ask your car dealer what the price is, it increases at least every 5% every month. That is usually because of outcomes like this. So what do we do? I think we need to rethink our monetary policy. I think the Central Bank of Nigeria needs to start to be innovative in their cash reserve ratio allocation. One idea is to bring back the idea of multi-tiered CRR. And what I mean by this is we need to be able to start rewarding good performance from banks. That is, banks that have very high loan-to-deposit ratios. South Africa has a loan-to-deposit ratio of 105. That data is from STAIRS, and STAIRS co-founder is here, Abdul. Pleasure to have you around. I had to use data from you guys as well. Yeah. Nigeria's loan-to-deposit ratio average is hovering just about 50, and most of our big banks do 40. The good ones who still loan to the real sector do 40. But the bank that I bank with, and you can guess, I'm not going to put them under the floor, but you can guess, the bank that I bank with are doing 16, their loan-to-deposit ratio. There are also a number of banks that are having NPLs that are really embarrassing. As you do know, of course, Heritage Bank had to be gutted out of the market because their NPLs are unbelievable. They're non-performing loans. That's what NPLs mean. So what we're saying is basically tear them. The ones that have very healthy NPL rates, the ones that also have very good loan-to-deposit rates, if you're doing 40 and above, give them the tier 1 mark and reduce your CRR for those banks that are in tier 1. That way, you're incentivizing good behavior in terms of accessing or enabling access to very scarce micro and macro credit, especially for our real sector, especially for our Manufacturing Association of Nigeria and their members. If you read any of the reports or informationals, They keep harping on how expensive credit is. Super expensive. You're getting a 50 million naira facility and you're having to pay 90 million naira the next year back. It's not sustainable as a MSME founder, and there are a number of MSME founders here who can attest to just how expensive it is. I'll give you another very instructive stat. The Nigerian banking sector has assets worth 100 trillion naira. Who can guess how much of that is loans? They have an asset of 100 trillion naira. How much of that is loans? Close to 40%, 36%. Guess what? 61% of those loans, or the loan assets, 61% of them are short-term loans. You cannot grow an economy with short-termist financing. It has to be long-term, patient capital, especially when you're doing infrastructure, especially when you're doing high-level manufacturing, and even imported light manufacturing. Also, a number of the entrepreneurs in this room, I can see them, are into fashion, music. You know, there's a music founder here. She's going to need tenures as long as 3 years to be able to reach actual effect when it comes to financing her artists or the artists under her portfolio. We're not going to get, and that's just the truth, you're not going to get tenures of up to 3 years for most, in fact, all Nigerian banks. The most you're going to get is 18 months, and they're going to give you impossible interest rates. So the cost of credit to the real sector that actually affects economic growth is really high. As you do know, one of the major reasons why Nigeria's GDP growth increased dramatically between 2013 to 2014, not GDP growth, but GDP size, was due to the rebasing. And what did the rebasing do? It put out inputs, mostly from the creative economy. So when microcredit is super expensive for a major push when it comes to economic activity like the creative economy, this is what happens. You know, we have very dire outcomes. So we need to be able to rethink monetary policy in that regard. Can we move forward? Now, just end with my last rallying call. When you want to improve security and invest in human capital and infrastructure, the bane of that, or the responsibility of that, is taken largely by government. That is their constitutional responsibility. That is why they were set up as a state. Anybody who has read anything from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the social contract theory, understands that craftsmanship, building a state, has to be a social contract where you, the people, are voting in a government in exchange for them to provide services to make you calmer. Because if they're not providing the right services and making conditions better for you, you have every right to revolt. And it's not even a right that you're making as a decision. It's just basically your reaction to poor or dire macroeconomic conditions. And we noted that with the end bad governance protests. And if conditions continue to worsen the way it is, we're still going to have more revolts that are going to disrupt activity. So my rallying call here, amongst our policy recommendation, is to have subnationals especially take the mantle and govern. For far too long, for 30 years plus, state governments have been absolutely abysmal. Abysmal. If I ask you to point out one governor who has done phenomenally across HDI numbers, it's very hard for you to pick one particular governor from a flurry of close to 100 governors since 1999. That's because governance, especially at the subnationals, has been abysmal. Local government governance is nothing to write home about. In fact, we give up, or most of us have given up on local government governance. But they have a full responsibility in financialization, especially when it comes to financing infrastructure, the critical infrastructure that we need for growth to happen. States now have, thanks to the Electricity Act of 2023, states now have the power to have their own electricity markets. What do I mean by that? They can regulate, they can generate, or allow for private sector players to generate within them without any neck disturbance, and they can generate for as many megawatts as possible. So there's, prior to that Electricity Act, you can only do 2 megawatts or lower without neck disturbing you to sell to the national grid. Anything higher than that, you had to sell the excess to the national grid. Now you can just supply it to your state grid. What's the activity in terms of state governments that have either started working on their electricity regulation bills or even passed it? Not more than 10 states are in that stage, and we have 36 states. So we need to see more governance activity from our state governors. We need to see them set up electricity markets. We need to see them get external financing. We also need to see them be creative with their external financing. And one of the propositions in that regard is municipal bonds or state bonds. Now, state bonds aren't a new thing. Governor or erstwhile governor of Cross River State, Donald Duke, borrowed 450 million euros between 2023 and 2024 to build Tinapa. Everybody in this room knows that Tinapa is moribund. 450 million crispy euro notes wasted on a white elephant project. That will have been phenomenal for their road infrastructure. That will have been phenomenal for water, phenomenal for their schools, phenomenal for agro, phenomenal for upskilling, for a lot of these things. So we have a misallocation of capital problem. We have a poor governance problem. The federal government also losing out in their responsibility of protecting us as a people, defending our territorial integrity. A ragtag terrorism group has now joined in from Niger with little to no reaction. These are the things that are going to affect us in 2025 if we don't fix. And of course, governance will have to happen. So I end by saying that if we want to be able to at least achieve our bull growth rate projections or our bull case forecast for Nigeria in 2025, we have to govern well. We have to make sure that we push those who are constitutionally backed to govern us to govern well, and not coddle them and say, oh, he's trying. Well, he's trying, and you're going to the bank accessing loans with interest rates as high as 70%. Thank you, and God bless.
Please, a round of applause. When you're talking about something that you're passionate about, sometimes you don't know that you've stood up here for an hour. But that was actually a really informative presentation by Basil Abia. Please come forward. I would crave your indulgence to please just come forward, people who are sitting at the back. And it's an appearance issue. As a photographer, when you're trying to capture the audience, this scattered look is not very good. So please help us to be photogenic. Thank you. You see, the photographer is thanking me. So please come forward so that there is a better, more photogenic look. Thank you. You all look very good, and I'm sure that the pictures will come out really nice. Thank you. We'll move to the panel conversation, and that will be grouped together with the Q&A session as well. I would like to invite to join me on the podium individuals who contributed to this report, and we'll have a quick conversation with them. Please join me on the stage, Danubi. Please, a round of applause for her. Mr. Victor Igono. Please, a round of applause. Mr. Charles Asiebu. Ms. Chisom Udora. And finally, also Mr. Basil Abia. All right, so this is the team that put together this report. Morris, please, can you adjust our sound? It doesn't have to be this loud. And we're really just going to have a chat about the report. If you aren't living under a rock, and I believe everyone here, we're acutely aware of the economic pain that we're going through in this country at the moment. How many of you are? So it's soaring energy prices, it's inflation, and other, economic conditions are worsening. And heading into 2025, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, and there's a lot of questions in people's minds about whether over the next year we will feel some sort of relief, or if this is our new normal, and this is how life is going to be, or God forbid, could things get even worse? And as Basil has, so eloquently and in detail presented, the report that Veriv Africa has produced offers a thorough examination of these 3 scenarios that might, tell us what the future entails for Nigeria. So this panel conversation will try to delve a bit deeper into the factors and conditions that would likely influence our journey towards any of these scenarios. Some of these factors are within our sphere of control. That means that we can do something to either control or influence what could happen, but others might actually unfold independently of our actions. We may not be able to change them, but we can anticipate and strategize for them accordingly. Moreover, for change, should it occur, it might not be universal, which means that opportunities or outcomes may not be uniformly distributed across sectors or regions. So we have, and I'm glad we have Dr. Pelumi here, who will begin by expanding on the specific sectors where we hope to see some growth, or where we have potential for growth and resilience. Basil will then discuss some critical areas where our policy choices, and he started that conversation already, policy choices and governance actions can shape these outcomes. Victor will provide insights on external factors beyond our immediate control that could significantly impact our economic fortunes. Afterward, we will focus on 2 key areas that are essential for Nigeria's economic aspirations and our economic rebound. The first is energy supply, which is a core driver of frustration this year, and probably even the year before. We all know about the national grid, that it knows how to collapse. It's epileptic. But apart from that, fuel prices have tripled. And so it's really, a challenge for us. And we keep hearing the government promoting compressed natural gas, and some people are even saying, solar. So it'll be interesting to hear from Charles, who's also here, to offer clarity on, what policy and market trends are shaping energy supply in 2025. Secondly, we're looking at infrastructure, which remains a foundational enabler. We can escape it for growth. So Chisom is here to help us understand how that landscape will evolve over the coming year, and what we might, look forward to expect. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the panel. So I'll start with Dr. Pelumi. From the report, there are some specific sectors that you're looking at that would represent bright spots in Nigeria's economic recovery. Could you shed some more light on these sectors and why you chose them? Importantly, how might growth in these sectors impacts the economic pressures that we're feeling right now? And are these sectors positioned to offer near-term relief that's immediate? In 2025, we begin to feel it. Or are we looking at something that is more long-term?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for gracing this occasion. Basically, as Basil mentioned as he was presenting, we all know that Nigeria is in a reform environment right now. We've seen a lot of reforms in the last couple of months, and we've not really seen the full impact in terms of the effectiveness of these reforms. So we forecasted or projected 3 channels or 3 expectation or possible outcomes, given some of the assumptions that we have. And we also look at the possible outcomes based on the effectiveness of some of these reforms. As Basil also mentioned, that there are some other factors that are global in nature, that are not endogenous, that are exogenous. Those are also part of the factors we looked into. But for Nigeria, we expect on a good day, on a steady state, on what it is, to see that the service sector continue to drive productivity. But the issue here is that service sector is actually not labor intensive, is rather more capital intensive than labor intensive. So this would not have that impact on employment or unemployment levels, impact on what I call the per capita GDP, economic activities. Generally we know that the agricultural sector is the major employer of labor, and the sector has not grown at the pace that would actually drive the growth that we are looking at. So for business as usual, we also expect that there will be a continual rebound in the oil sector, as we have seen in the last 2-3 quarters, which has, from the COVID pandemic and the impact, the global supply and all that, we've seen that the oil sector actually dipped and it was recording negative growth rate for a couple of months, but we've gradually seen this rebound. So we expect this rebound to be very marginal and very fragile. So this would also support growth, as we also expect that the service sector will be the major driver. So for the best case scenario, we are looking at, we are seeing the possibility of these reforms that we have seen to have a positive impact, particularly the exchange rate management reform. We expect to see more stability in that regard. We expect to see more portfolio investment inflow, strengthening the naira, and of course, when we have that, that would also affect, supply of FX. That would affect the manufacturing. That would affect some of the value-added sector. In addition, we expect to see some improvements, all the interventions that we have seen in the agricultural sector. We expect to see some major improvements in this regard. Some of the issues as touching insecurities and the like, we expect probably there will be a sense of positive impact in addressing some of these issues. We know there have been talks around this and there have been measures. So we expect that, in coming 2025, we see positive impact from the agricultural sector, from the industrial sector, the manufacturing sector, and this alongside the service sector would pull or drive growth. So we expect for the best case scenario to see the economic growth at 3.6%, and you will agree with me that 3.6% is still very fragile, right? This is not what we want at this time. We are expecting to have 6 to 9% growth rate. That is what we need. And even for us to get to that 1 trillion naira economy that the president is advocating for, we need to do more. Now, for the worst case scenario, which we hope doesn't happen, is to see lagging impact of this reform on the economy, to see worsening insecurity issue in manufacturing sensitive centers, the northern state and middle belt, see the issue with oil thefts and vandalism getting worse. This will, of course, affect our export of oil, crude oil. That, of course, will affect the net export, will affect the stability of naira, which would affect some of these productive sectors like we have in agriculture, mining, and all. So with that, we expect that growth rate will be very fragile, like 2.6%. But generally, as we have seen, we are hoping that status quo would be where the service sector will still be the major driver, while we see the agricultural sector, the oil and gas sector, and even the mining sector, supporting this drive in GDP next year. Thank you.
So Basil, as you stated, policy choice is critical. Governance conditions will also play a huge role. From where you sit, what key policy, you've talked about that, so maybe you don't repeat some of the stuff you've actually said, but in addition to what you've already said, what's going to tip the scale for a better day scenario, and maybe you just want to focus on what are the low-hanging fruits, like what are things that if we did quickly, low cost, high impact, what actions should we be demanding right now to make sure that the sacrifice, the pain that we're enduring at the moment is not just pain, it's not in vain, but it's actually sacrifice for the future.
Okay, thank you very much for the question, and I'll go straight to it. We need to be able to decentralize our policy making quality, and what I mean by that is that policy at subnational levels have to be revved up very fast. Secondly, the policies that state governments should be able to be looking at is how to speed up not only the establishment of the state electricity markets, that they now have the power and the backing to do so, but also ensuring that there's an incentivization of private capital influx as well as state financing influx via development financing to ensure three things: that there's money to be able to build the generating plants. As small as they are, we need a multiplicity of them. So take for instance, Adamawa State. You do 5 megawatts in Mubi, you do 5 megawatts in Michigan, you do 5 megawatts in Madagali, you do 10 megawatts in Yola South, 10 megawatts in Yola North, you do 10 megawatts in Tongo. When it adds up, you're increasing the rate of electricity that is provided provided to most of the real sector in that state. Currently, we do, according to data from YEDC, we do between 60 to 70 megawatts on a good day. And I don't think this year we have done anything close to 60 megawatts. A state with close to 4 million people with that landmass is taking in 60 megawatts. That's what a county in the US takes. I don't even need to use the US as an example. I know provinces in South Africa that are doing 10 times that number. I know provinces in South Africa that are doing 5 times or 3 times that particular number. And provinces in South Africa basically are states in the context of Nigerian governance. So we're very energy poor. And when you're able to ensure that you bridge that energy poverty gap, you speed up productivity right away. I give you basic examples with value chain, for instance. I lived and worked in Katsina, and very close to the local government that I was working in, Daudawa village in Faskari local government, there was a hub for tomato and onions. They do a lot of onions and tomato production. But the problem is the bulk of their produce, when it gets to Lagos, 80%, again, like I said, post-harvest losses are across tomato. The tomato value chain is about 80%. 80% of whatever they're shipping from Bakori and the towns close by to end consumers like Lagos, for instance, are lost. Why? There's the lack of cold chain infrastructure. Secondly, the lack, and you cannot do processing without energy. And you cannot do processing when energy is self-generated. We have a self-generated number of about 40,000 megawatts. Data from STERS, of course, and I have to mention that that was a very good energy report that they did together with Sterling. But low-hanging fruits here, from the pictures that I'm trying to draw up here for all of you with the numbers that I'm using, is if you are able to take full advantage of the Nigeria Electricity Act 2023 as a state governor and deploy not only bonds, but also access to providing the ease of doing business that can bring private investors to be able to do 2 megawatts, 5 megawatts solar power plants, hybrid power plants, the waste-to-energy power plants. Why on earth, for instance, can't? Why is it that up to now, Abia State do not have a waste-to-energy power plant? I did field work in Aba countless times, and I know how dirty Aba can be. Obviously, that is improving, but it's still an endemic problem because there's no waste management system that enables for that solid matter municipal waste to be transitioned for energy production across electricity. We don't have these things. And they're quite, in all honesty, they don't cost a lot. You can do a 10 million waste-to-energy plant in Aba. You can do a 5 million waste-to-energy plant in Yola. Guess how much we spent on the 2 flyovers that are now basically our Eco-Link bridge in Yola? We spent over 21 million US dollars. State bonds. They access the financing via bonds, and guess what the governor in his wisdom decided to do? Spend them on flyovers that are frankly not needed in a state that is chronically energy poor. 70 megawatts on their good day, and they have not even hit 70 megawatts throughout this year. So low-hanging fruits in terms of policy making has to be in energy. It has to be that you have a very coherent renewable energy policy. You also have a very coherent financialization policy, especially when it comes to infrastructure development as states. My rallying call here is that our sub-nationals have to do the heavy lifting now henceforth. And I'm not oblivious of just how abysmal some of the policy making from the federal government has been, but right now it's time to come home, and the first point of contact is our state governments and state governors.
Thank you, Basil, for that. And since we are on the subject of energy, I will go to Charles, because, again, like I said, our grid, and I keep saying it, the grid is epileptic, collapses every Monday and every Thursday. And the government is telling us that the future is that we should migrate to CNG. But, and I don't know because, I saw one WhatsApp story, some guy's CNG car exploded somewhere. Not quite sure again whether this thing is actually the right thing for us or whether it is the voice of oil and gas through the voice of government telling us what to do. But Charles is an expert in this area, so you're in the position to unpack this for us, to help us understand how policy and market trends in the energy sector might shape our experiences in 2025. How much of what Basil is saying is achievable in terms of low-hanging fruits? What can we realistically expect?
Thank you. So to properly understand the undercurrents in the energy sector, it would be good to point out that the sector has about 3 subsectors, which is the oil and gas, electricity or power, and renewables. We have touched a bit on oil, but I'll just highlight a few things. Oil is our main, economic mainstay, but beyond that, about 70% of our exports is oil-based, and the geopolitics or the global issues, what I choose to call external issues, have affected us in the long run, as we have seen with the Russian and Ukraine war, and also the Israeli, Gaza, Lebanon, and now Iran war. All of those have an impact. We saw Europe, trying to drift because of the ban they placed on Russia to look for other markets. That rush led to some increases of, which we did not really benefit from because of our internal issues as a country. But it also led to some changes in terms of people who, they are buying oil from us. For example, India used to buy about 250,000 barrels per day from us. It dropped to about 193. And then India and then countries like China had to, go for the Russian oil that was now discounted. So those are some of the trends, and that was what Angela Capolongo and Michael Coe titled the butterfly effect of geopolitical conflict. But beyond the conflict, for the externals, there is also, the competition between OPEC and non-OPEC, countries for market access and for market share. And even in that mix, there's also the OPEC supply and, OPEC cut in quotas. So to ensure that the market is a bit competitive so that there's some form of equitable distribution of the market share, OPEC reduced their quota to less than 2 million for country OPEC member states. And that is just so that countries like Nigeria that has a problem in meeting that quota is able to catch up. We have seen some changes. We've been able to do 1, 3, 1, 4, 5, but we're not there yet. But now they are planning to bring back to increase the quota to 2 million. And countries like Saudi Arabia that can do over 3.7 million would flood the market. So what it means for us is that we are not able to compete actively. Our market share size will drop, drastically, and there will be significant price drop or price cuts. We're not able to sell. We're looking for how to sell our products at very reduced prices. So that's it for oil. Also, for the internal, have some internal challenges that is impacting that sector as well. One is, the issue of oil theft and insecurity. When we did this research, we had, some key interviews, we did some qualitative interviews and spoke to key experts. And one thing stood out, very clearly for us was that between 2012 and 2016, Shell invested about $1 billion in security in the Niger Delta. Down the line, I think 3 years down the line, they could not account for 60%. The bunkering, fire, everything was still going on, and it didn't make any sense. So it's as though it is irredeemable, locally. And what it now did was that most of the IOCs now went offshore, right? They were no longer onshore because of the insecurity. They were going onshore, offshore, and offshore operations are expensive. Maintaining rigs and transporting via helicopter, workers over there, there are some challenges, real challenges that in turn impact on the economy and the market. Seen all of those going on, and then there's the accountability issue. The NNPC is saying something, that is within a statement today, and then Dangote is coming out to review. So it shows you the depth of misalignment when the key players are not even able to communicate. It's a big challenge that we noted, and that's the problem. But I'm going very fast. So going to power, of course, our generation capacity has not been encouraging. We discussed, just about 50% of the country area that has supply from the grid, national grid. And as at this point, we have a capacity, installation capacity of about 13,000 megawatts, but all we are able to actually do is about 7,000. But even at that, we are not able to meet 7,000. We are doing between 5,000 and 5. I think this year the highest was about 5.2, and generally the highest has been 5,800 megawatts. So what it means is that we cannot rely on the national grid anymore, and the advocacies around green energy, clean energy has come in now to say, okay, there's this alternative, and there's a lot going on in that sector. So for renewables, let me just go directly. We have seen a lot of advocacy, mostly from development partners, international development agencies, including implementing partners, putting their efforts to ensure that but I mean, solar is just 0.2%, and there's a lot of work to be done. So in terms of CNG, let me divert. I call it our pain points. So the government has not been able to touch us, at where the shoe is paying us. And so when they bring out these policies, there's first of all that apprehension. They are not sure about it. There are a lot of conversations around how serious the government is. And because the government has shown capacity to always want to cut corners, it further aggravates the issues. Thank you.
Can I corroborate something with what you said about CNG? And it's just statistics to just highlight how much fugazi this initiative is. When you want to be able to meet demand, especially as an alternative source of energy for demand, you have to be able to have the supply side infrastructure in place, first and foremost. We have a multi-product gas pipeline network of about 4,335 kilometers. Capacity utilization is around 22%. A vast part of the Southeast, the second most important and second largest manufacturing cluster in Nigeria, is not connected to any form of gas grid infrastructure. The OB3, which is supposed to be the one that does most of that connection, we haven't reached a final investment decision yet on that. The NIGC, Nigeria Gas Infrastructure, NGIC, Gas Infrastructure Company, for some reason that I do not know, still don't want to push for those pipeline projects to be able to reach a final investment decision. And then we now go to talk about the regulatory infractions or the regulatory hurdles when it comes to transportation of the CNG. Trucking is, you can't truck more than 500 kilometers. That's it's not only a regulatory framework, but it's also, for me, commonsensical that you shouldn't do that for a number of reasons, as you do know, with regards to disaster. Then you have the lack of conversion stations. How many conversion stations do we have in Abuja? A country, or a city with at least 3 million people, we can probably just analyze and say there are about 300,000 vehicles, and we don't have up to 30 conversion stations. There are states that don't have conversion stations at all. There are cities that have 1 million or more people and at least 50,000 vehicles or more that do not have conversion stations at all. This is the problem. You want to wheel out the cart without the horse. It's like you're just training the cart and making sure that one day eventually you're going to get to Mubi from Abuja. It doesn't make any sense, and this is not the right way to do public policy making. public policy making, you have to make sure that whatever that you're trying, so there's a problematization problem in public policy making. We have not problematized exactly what the energy deficits are. We don't know how to highlight or segment them. We just decide that, oh, because PMS pump price has spiked up to 1,000 above, we need to find an alternative, and then we call that alternative green. I've actually seen presidential spokesmen call the CNG initiative a green initiative, which I find incredibly laughable. But the crux of the matter here is, it is not going to meet demand. If we unlock 1% demand for CNG, I can assure you right now, the infrastructure and the capacity of the Nigerian state cannot match it. This is not the way to do it.
Thank you. A round of applause. Now, I'm going to Victor next. And the fact that Nigeria doesn't exist in a vacuum. We've talked about our internal problems, but, you know, I think my favorite Bible verse is, if you run with footmen and they weary you, how can you contend with horses? Outside there are bigger factors that we need to contend with that might impact our economic trajectory. One small change in the global environment, and you know, we might actually catch cold if somebody sneezes. So in your view, what external factors should we have on our radar? So for instance, Basil mentioned Trump's election, you know, and perhaps other international shifts. How might they throw us a curveball? Or perhaps maybe they could even open up unexpected opportunities. For instance, me, I'm thinking that maybe Trump's election might actually favor me, you know, and my family.
Okay, thank you. And it would be good to hear if you have a connection with Trump. But anyway, when we started working on the article, we're looking at a number of key developments around the world. We're still dealing with the impact of COVID, nearly 3 years later. But apart from that, there have been other developments. We saw the attack on Israel last year, which kickstarted a war that is gradually inching towards a regional conflict in the Middle East. And it has affected a lot of things, of course, including shipping in the Mediterranean, potential attacks on Iranian oil facilities, and also just increased shipping costs around the world. So that's another key geopolitical issue. Now, when we started working on the article, it was not really clear who was going to be the US president, because we've been working on this for 2 months, and that was an area of uncertainty. But today, that certainty has been dealt with. We know that Trump is the president, but then that creates a whole new layer of uncertainties because, quite frankly, there's a lot of things he has promised. There's a lot of things he has threatened to do. So in terms of how it could impact Nigeria, of course, we're an oil export economy, and he's very big on China, he's very big on Iran. Iran is a key oil player. So if we look at the oil world, if there's a threat to any key supply center, then obviously that is likely to increase the price of oil, for which we could benefit. Now, that's on paper, of course, because we saw the same issue with the Russia-Ukraine issue in 2022, where there was a window where Europe was literally scrambling to find energy. They couldn't find it. They were willing to put money into projects that would guarantee energy security. And we were here. The best I heard from the minister at the time was that we were waiting for investors. Whereas presidents and prime ministers of other countries that didn't have as much oil as we did were flying over to Europe to try to sign a deal and take advantage of that opportunity. We didn't see anything from the petroleum minister. We didn't see anything from the president, that's the previous administration. We didn't see anything from his chief chief of staff or anybody. So it's my hope that if Trump, well, I'm not hoping that he goes heavy on Iran, but if it happens and there's an opportunity, I hope that we can take advantage of it. It's technically useless for us. The other key thing is what happens with Russia. The Russia-Ukraine war is still on. Russia has been pushed out of the oil market, at least the larger oil market. China and India are still buying, but it's been pushed out of the larger oil market. Now, if Trump comes in with all of the talk about his close relationship with Putin, and he's able to end the war in one day, and it means, just doing something that favors Russia, probably cutting back on sanctions and bringing Russia back to the global oil market, then we could see a significant surge in supply, which is likely to reduce prices and which would be bad for us. So, in one word, Trump could be good or bad for us, depending on what he eventually does. If he's heavy on Iran, it could be good for us. If he's very soft on Russia and brings Russia back to the oil market, it could be bad for us. Now, of course, there are a couple other factors that we looked at, including what's happening in Africa. So some of the key developments over the past 2 to 3 years have been the rise in the number of coup d'etat. We saw Gabon, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, which essentially has made West and Central Africa like a hub of coup. Now, obviously, it's not happened in Nigeria, and we pray it doesn't happen, but for an external investor, that label of a region riddled with coup and instability is terrible for us. So even if nothing of that sort happens in Nigeria, to the extent that we see more coup d'etats around the region, it could be very bad for us. And on the
Can you give him another microphone, please? Thank you.
On a positive note, there's been a lot of talk about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And there's been a range of reactions from Nigeria and Nigerians. Some people fear that we could become the dumping ground for goods from other parts of Africa, but some people see it as an opportunity to access a $3.1 trillion market, especially for other non-oil products that we have, whether that's agriculture or it's light manufacturing. So that's an external factor, but it's one that we can react to in a better way than maybe whatever is happening around the globe. So it's my hope that whatever key shortcomings that we have that have been highlighted by the other speakers would be addressed so that we can take advantage of that market, and it will play, or it could play, a very important role in the drive towards diversification and reducing our reliance on oil. So in summary, basically, Trump could be a factor. The conflict in the Middle East could be a factor. The US-China relationship could be a factor. The potential rise of coup d'etat or other security issues in the region could impact us. And on a positive note, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, to the extent that we are able to key into it, could impact us on a positive note. So I think those are the key developments that we see. Thank you.
This is a round of applause for him. Chisom, you love to talk about infrastructure. That's what I was told. And definitely infrastructure is important because it's a critical enabler for sustainable growth. So in your view, how might infrastructure and public services evolve in the horizon? that could give us immediate relief? Or are there things that we're expecting that are not immediate, but could result in some sort of long-term economic stability?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Amara. Okay, so 2025, in the infrastructural space, we are going to be seeing lots of projects. For now, I think transport infrastructure would get the best for now. And this would naturally translate in more revenue generation, safer travels, and utilization of the road transport. But due to situations like the insecurity, when Basil was talking earlier, he spoke of a new terrorist group in town. So no matter how safe the roads are, I think this is still going to be a major problem for us. And due to the roads or the improvements of the roads, because they said they are not building new projects, they are just going to complete the existing ones. We are going to see more economic activities, better opportunities that are opening up because there are connections between states and all. So I think there are going to be immediate effects. But in the long run, there are definitely going to be general effects where it would reflect on our GDP and the rest, all these job employments that are opening up. But immediately, we are going to have improved quality of life, standard of living, due to all these projects that are happening.
I'll be able to enter a CNG bus from Abuja to Yola.
If you have the mind.
Okay, this is the point where we open up the floor for questions. If anyone has questions for these very intelligent people sitting here, you raise your hand, and we will get a microphone to you. Is there anyone who can help with the microphone? I have three hands. And do you want to come up? You don't want to come up. You want to sit there and the microphone will meet you. This is economic outlook. Okay, so just your name, one question. Actually, you can use this microphone.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Obayi Brightifying, and I'm in the agricultural space. I followed a lot about the American election, and it is my own personal belief that Trump could be a very important factor to our macroeconomic outlook. Now, I just want to give some background so that, Basil, this question is to you because I know you've spoken so much about it before. We see a lot of investors have more kind of faith in the American business space. So there's a lot of investment already being pushed to the United States. Now, you asked me earlier, what do I believe the US Naira ratio would be? I say 2,500 Naira because I believe that, oh my God. Okay, so because I believe that a lot of Trump policy is going to strengthen the dollar, and it's going to actually make it a bit scarce for Nigerian government to get dollar, which they will use to peg against the Naira. So these are my thoughts, but I want to know, are these in line or in consonant with what you are thinking and how that would impact our macroeconomic outlook? I don't know if you understand my question. Okay, I just basically gave my thoughts on how I believe Trump is going to affect our macroeconomic outlook for Nigeria in terms of making the American economy strong enough that there's a lot of investment. It becomes a hotbed for investors right? And strengthening the American dollar so that it becomes stronger than as it normally is now. So is this in consonance with your own thoughts on how Trump, his administration, is going to impact our macroeconomic outlook? Or if not, how is that going to, what is the variance?
So in essence, he's saying that as we are chasing the dollar, Trump will also be pushing the dollar away from us. But he will be doing it at a rate that is faster than our CBN can travel. So even though we might see that there is improvement or this policy might actually be working, but because Trump is more effective at strengthening the dollar, that he's of the opinion that we might end up in the worst case scenario with respect to the president.
I lost exactly what the crux of your question was, big because of your commentary, but I think Amara has done a great job at that. The core scenario we're looking at is Trump is very pro further exploration in the hydrocarbons. He's going to do it in every single way he can. We're going to see more fracking, we're going to see more exploration activity, especially in areas or regions that are native autonomous regions. So in America, this is what we call native autonomous regions, where Native Americans basically self-govern themselves or quasi-govern themselves. And there are lots of potential hydrocarbon assets that are yet to be exploited there that Trump wants to just carry out. There have been, of course, regulatory restrictions to those explorations over the past years, mostly from Democrat governments, led by Democrats, as we do know. But that doubling down in exploration is definitely going to affect the aggregate international oil price, And so that scenario basically is that there's a high chance, because of high output in terms of oil and gas activity in the U.S., we could see the crude oil price go lower than $70 per barrel. That obviously affects our revenue generation chances. And as you do know, of course, it weakens the naira against the dollar, and there's exchange rate pass-through to the inflation. So as good as Cardozo does some of his NPR mechanics next year, let's say he even adheres to or follows our recommendations with regards to TED or multi-TED CRR when it comes to monetary tightening. As good as the fiscal side starts to work hand in hand with that NPR tightening from the CBN, there's a very high chance, again, like you said, because of that further doubling down in hydrocarbon exploration in the US, that will sink our crude oil exports revenue chances, and that just puts us at a very precarious situation. That now segues to our core argument about economic diversification. We're a very, very vulnerable macroeconomy. We need to be able to start to see inputs from our non-oil sector. We've started to see increase in that, but it is largely artificial because, of course, of the weakening of the naira. We want to see actual, real productive output from our non-oil sectors. That will come from agriculture, that will come from mining, that will come from light manufacturing, that will come from intellectual property sales. Unfortunately, there are structural issues bedeviling us from taking advantage or even increasing productivity in these particular sectors. And I've mentioned them, and I'll mention them again. We have infrastructure impediments. We have impediments caused, of course, by exogenous shocks. We also have impediments caused by our policy and our governance. A lot of rent seeking in our subnationals, affecting productive activity. Let me give you an anecdotal story that just probably ends my answer to you. When I was with Next Edition, that was probably my first job after my NYC. I was the Abuja correspondent for Next Edition, and the co-founder, Ibanga Esine, 2015 African Journalist of the Year, CNN African Journalist of the Year, by the way. He decided to carry out this empirical study. He took a road trip, by the way, he's from Akwa Ibom. He took a road trip from Yola to Uyo, and he counted I kid you not, the report, of course, you can just query it via Google. I kid you not, he counted 150 checkpoints. And every single checkpoint there asked for money because he accompanied livestock truckers, so livestock logistics in that sense. So when you're wondering why the prices of livestock, the prices of food is super high, there's an artificial pressure to that price base level. That is coming from this, as I said, very poor local governance from our subnationals. We have to be able to have governors
and local government chairmen rein in on these things, because they stymie growth, they stymie potential productivity. Imagine you have a 100 million naira facility, and one of your friends who's from Benue says, come, let's do some livestock production. And while we're doing livestock production, let me add a logistics component so that we go to the end consumers of meat. By the way, the largest consumers of meat in Nigeria is Lagos State. So let's say you're potentially targeting the Lagos market because of the Owambe that happens every Saturday and Sunday. Unfortunately for you, you're going to have additional price pressure or price transmission pressure if you use that data of 150 checkpoints. And those checkpoints, they have a multiplicity. They are constituted authorities from federal authorities, your army, your police, your civil defense corps. Then you have the non-constituted authorities. Almost every Joe and Harry local government and village have one union that is collecting something. Okay, pay us tribute. You go to Ore, and folks in Ore are saying you should pay them tribute of 5,000 per truck or 10,000 per truck. All of these things play into the feature of the structural impediments with regards to productivity. So, to be honest, if we don't diversify, we're going to be vulnerable to the oil price shocks. And these oil price shocks can be exacerbated by Trump's presidency. I hope I did justice to your question.
Thank you. So, like I said, the actions or inactions could create supply shocks, right? So short-term supply shocks, there's not much you can do beyond maybe ramping up slight production. But of course, if you follow the local industry, there are lots of issues that we have, from pipeline issues to infrastructure issues. So you cannot switch from 1.4 million barrels to, say, 2.5 million barrels overnight. I think one of the best opportunities we had was with Russia attacking Ukraine, where the European countries came to a point where they had to confront a fear they had long had, which was excessive dependence on Russian oil. And at that time, they were willing to put money into projects. Now, I don't know if that will be the case with Iran, but to the extent that it does, my argument is we need to go beyond sitting and waiting for investors. We have a petroleum ministry, we have a trade and industry ministry that should be on the lookout for opportunities around the world. And if there is an opportunity, it doesn't take anything to fly from here to whichever country has those fears to say, look, if you're willing to give us the funds, we can guarantee we will supply X amount to you. So there needs to be that proactiveness on our part, looking out for opportunities and taking advantage of it. Nigeria has oil, no question, but Nigeria is not the only country that has oil. So while we're sitting and waiting for investors, the Angolans are flying out to sign deals. People in Equatorial Guinea and Gabon and other places are flying out to sign deals. So yeah, we should be on the lookout for opportunities, but we should also be able to be the salesperson to say, give us the funds, we can do this. If we are not able to push that ladder to attract funds by taking advantage of opportunities, in the short term, there's really not much. You can't switch by 500,000 barrels overnight. We don't have that capacity. So that's where I see us potentially taking advantage of this. Thanks.
We spoke about the possibility of improving
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't get your name, but I'll just say Shay. Okay, thank you, Shay. So you used Abuja as an instance, so I'll continue with that. There are ongoing plans about intrastate transportation. Earlier in the year, our Minister for FCT, His Excellency Wike, he commissioned a bus terminal, and there are plans to make others. And this development is going at a very fast pace. I'll say 60% done with the one I know that is very close to my office at Mabushi. And there are other ones. I've seen Otako Terminal. And so yes, there are plans to reduce this close of work congestion, and to also reduce the insecurity that comes with along, because there's a lot of one chance and the rest. So yes, the government has that, and they are working on it.
So are we seeing that in 2025? Because it's easy to say.
Yes. That's for Mabi. It should be open. Worst case scenario, middle of next year.
And additional CNG buses.
Yes, I think they want to front that CNG bus, but
generally, in aggregate, it's very good to sample down to the sub-unit. And in this context, FCT, we do know that there's going to be increased activity in terms of infrastructure for transportation. But I frankly think it's insufficient. And the reason for that, of course, is our population numbers. I've been complaining since I moved into Abuja in 2017, just how terrible public transportation here is. We have a rail transit infrastructure that we spent over $1 billion of Chinese financing that basically leads to nowhere, doesn't go through the nerve centers. How can you do mass transit where it doesn't go through the nerve population centers? It's appalling, and a redesign will probably cost $1.5 billion based on projections. We are going to have to look at the Minister of FCT to be creative with financing that. And one of the ideas that we push in our policy recommendations, very important that I highlighted here, is for subnationals, like, of course, in the context of governance, the FCT minister is a state governor. So for subnationals like that of the FCT and many other Nigerian states, what they can do, since most private credit is really expensive and wants cost-reflective recumpenses, or whatever the English is, you want, when they're giving you a loan for, say, a facility of about $200 million, you want that every year you're recouping a certain amount. And sometimes that can be really harsh on our very impoverished economies. So what state governments can do in terms of their creativity in financialization is that when they issue these bonds, mostly foreign denominated bonds, they tie it down to assets, or they tie it down to their IGR. Since most governors now are priding themselves as IGR merchants, well, let us put it to work. Tie the bonds that you're issuing to IGR. That forces you to automate your revenue generation processes. That forces you to start to work with your local governments and not lord over them. When you start to work with your local governments as friends and colleagues rather than lording over them, you start to see increase in capacity utilization with regards to the revenue generating officers. They are upskilled, there's automation of the processes, and the productive areas start to return. Why they're returning is because they are seeing development that is right in front of them. They know that if they go to Pape, there's a massive bus terminal that is being erected, and gives them confidence that, look, I have to pay this fee because I want this bus terminal to work so that I can have easier access in and out of Pape. That's basically how development works. So we need our subnational leaders to be very creative, and that helps with situations like this. And let me tell you how important, why it is very important for transportation. You can carry out neoliberal reforms much better, with better threshold, and your citizenry not really affected if they have adequate transportation infrastructure. Why is that? The major reason why people are feeling the pinch of the cost-reflective tariffs, as well as the subsidy removal, is simply because they are based, their logistics and their own transportation is vehicular-based, personal vehicular-based. It's super expensive to own a third or fourth generation car, and when you don't own it, you have to be able to use the cab drivers, and they're charging fair prices. While those prices are not fair on our pockets, it's actually fair in the cost of providing that service. But here's one thing you can do. When you have effective bus rapid transit systems, adequately reaching that demand for your subnationals, say a city like Yola or Birnin Kebbi or Kaduna or Abuja, let's say you do 300 buses that sorts out the metropolis. They are not going to pay the 3,000 naira you're going to pay from central area to Katampe. They're not going to pay 3,000. Max they're going to pay is 150 or 200 naira from here to Katampe via the bus rapid transit system. It's even going to be cheaper if you use a metro rail, an underground or overland metro rail. And the reason for that is because these train coaches can take very large numbers. An average train coach will take you 50 people. If your entire rail line has, let's say, 200 train coaches, and every time they're moving from one part of the city, let's say the east part of Abuja to the west part of Abuja, they're taking in 3,000 to 5,000 people who are not paying more than 200 naira for that trip. They're not feeling the pinch effect of the very necessary, for some development analysts, the very necessary neoliberal reforms. So you can actually get people to allay to your, not allay, but to agree to say, look, I'm seeing the reforms working, and I'm going to pay attention to it and ensure that we pay our own fair share as citizens. But when you have the infrastructure deficit that you have, anytime there is a slight increase in PMS prices, everybody feels it because we are vehicular based. Secondly, again, we do not have the infrastructure to cater to our transportation demand.
Thank you.
I won't take back.
So I just wanted to add something to the conversation around transportation in Abuja, especially for the Abuja Metro Rail. I think, like I said before, there's a problem with public data and our ability to access public data, and even ability to trust the government. So for the rail, I think in design there are supposed to be 12 stations, and it's supposed to connect. The original plan is that it's supposed to connect satellite cities, Kubwa, Bazango. If you know the road from Airport Junction leading towards, like, you're going out where you have bays and all of that, you see the railway. So it's those stations are supposed to become hubs where economic activities will improve gradually. But one significant challenge with that was there was no plan to build access roads from the original design. And so some of those communities do not have access roads. So what am I coming there to do? Right? There's no point. I can, instead of going to, for example, airport to, going to somewhere close to the airport to enter the rail, I could go to maybe Airport Road and enter a terminal there, as long as, there's an access to it. But those are some of the issues. It's not like the government doesn't think at all, and our partners don't think. But the information is not there, and we do it in such a way that we just want to benefit, grab something out of it, and then when the next administration comes, they hop on another challenge, and then the previous one suffers.
So, I have a follow-up question.
To Chiso, please.
I'm sorry, as well, I'd like to ask you a question. When Basil was speaking, he mentioned the reality losses that we have. I know that I see a number of them still working, but the conditions of those reality losses, I don't think that even I want to use those losses. Because everybody's cramped up inside their cabin, and then you know see that now they have conductors that shout, you get conductors on the reality losses. And then there are people that
in Abuja.
Yes.
PRT in Abuja.
Yes. You see them. Yes. Nothing see those conductors with reality buses, and you see everybody inside, cramped up like sardines. And then there are people that pass in Abuja. You see reality buses packed in their numbers, and they're not moving, they're not working. So instead of investing so much money, okay, we are doing a metro station, we are doing this, we are doing that. How about we go back to the reality buses that we have already? Instead of, oh, Project 2027 is coming, project this, project that, we have them on ground. How about we go back? They are just sitting down there wasting. Is it that those buses are just going to stay there and rust away, or there are no plans, they are going to add to the problems that we have in the environment as waste? What's the plan?
Before I continue, I don't work for the government. That's number one.
Are you sure?
I don't work for the government. Please do not see it as I'm siding the government. Yes. So most of the buses you see are not government owned anymore. That is why they are the way they are. And the bus terminals, I'm pretty sure, yes, we should have continued with the existing ones we have, but you know that somebody has to eat. So there are going to be new buses coming into those. And like he has been saying, most likely CNG buses coming into those bus terminals. So those buses you're seeing, most of them, I would like to believe 98% of them, if not all, have been auctioned or sold off to private people that decided to do whatever they want to do with it. So don't be scared that that's the bus you're going to enter when the bus terminal is completed.
Thank you. I think we have one more question from the floor, and then we have 2 questions online, and then we'll close. Yes.
My name is Christian. Construction sector. I want to and this first of all, I want to applaud Basil and the team for this very insightful right? We can't take 2 scenarios. This person is with Basil and for Victor. So Victor said the coming on next year, and if possible, pass out and we have higher oil prices, it's in our favor. If we have higher oil prices, and even now that the oil sector is fully to the world, so comes down, let's assume there's no sort of reliance, feeding source of it. It comes down to higher costs of oil prices. It really favors us. If we have lower oil prices, very, very low prices, and since it's a zero-based market, and the price of things drop down, it will not favor us. Which of these 2 scenarios best favors an average Nigerian?
Thank you, and it's a very tricky question. So let's start with what's the oil sector and its place in the country, right? It's more than just another economic sector. It is pretty much the source of nearly 70% of our foreign earnings, which plays a very important role in the stability or lack thereof of our currency. So in that sense, to the extent that we're able to get more forex earnings, ideally from all sources, but if we're being realistic, at least for the next couple of years, oil will continue to be a core source of foreign earnings. To the extent that we're able to get more foreign earnings, it will be good at the macro level. Now, whether that will be good for day-to-day Nigerians, that's another question, right? Now, and I don't know if in that sense we will be pushing for or hoping for a lower price internationally, because if that happens and there is no backup sector, whether agriculture or mining, to take up the mantle of providing forex, then our currency is still going to weaken. And if our currency weakens and there are a number of internal issues, I don't think just a low oil price or a low fuel price is going to solve all of the other issues we have. Now, so that would be my answer, that there is no straightforward or a single scenario I would be looking for. But at the macro level, higher energy prices will be good for us, and especially considering where our naira is now. In order to strengthen it, we're going to need more forex. Now, in terms of deregulation, as you said, so it's one thing to deregulate, but it's another thing to have a lot more players. My understanding of the argument for deregulating the sectors of the petroleum industry was that it would attract more players, there would be competition, and based on basic economics, more competition would hopefully drive down prices. Now, whether there are more players and a lot of competition in certain sectors of the oil and gas industry is an open question. There have been talks about monopoly, I don't want to call names, but we still have a few players, basically. I don't think we're there yet. The argument would make sense after we see a lot more players that are free to enter and exit the sector. So we might have the regulation on paper. I don't think we have it in reality at this point. It's very difficult, and you saw the drama that heralded the opening of our own refinery. And then even after the refinery was open, those who were looking for these ease of access to the industry are now calling for refusing import licenses to other people. Ideally, it should be a system where wherever you want to get your oil from, whether you're producing it locally or you're bringing it from the moon, as long as you meet our quality requirements, you can play in the sector. Let there be more people, more players, and if I'm able to get my own oil from Iran at half the price that you're getting it, I should be able to bring it and sell it at a lower price. So that would benefit the local people. But that's not what we're saying in terms of deregulation. We still see a lot of stickiness, regulatory agencies delaying licenses or coming up with reasons to push approvals or coming up with reasons to start a new round of testing. There's a lot of things happening, so I don't think we're fully deregulated in reality. If we are, that's one. And then the second thing, if there are more players coming in and there's a lot of competition, then maybe we can now begin to see the dividend of that deregulation, as we saw with telecoms, which is the popular example people like to give. But I don't think we're there with the energy sector. Thanks.
Thank you. The gentleman with the cap.
Good afternoon, everyone. Veriv for putting this report together. I have a comment to make, and it's in regards to the CNG that we spoke about. The approach came more like the CNG is not really like a good idea, but if you look at the Nigerian Energy Transition Plan, we have the Decade of Gas Initiative, which is there, and the reason is for us to be able to have a just transition, so that we will not just do away with our natural resources and then jump into solar and to other renewable forms. Now, the whole concept of the CNG is also to reduce emission. So the emission from CNG is less than the emission from petrol, less than the emission from diesel. So when you compare this emission and then you try to look into the country's nationally determined contribution, which we are supposed to do. So the best thing for the government, which they have done, I think, is the CNG's idea. And if we look at the buses that they are bringing, right, of the intracity travels, like this, a bus can take, this type of bus can take up to 50 or so, and people can also stand. When you try to do the calculation, the reduction in the emission, for these 100 buses that the government have signed, and I think they have been brought into the country already, that will greatly reduce the emission within the city. So I'm saying this so that we will not just see it like maybe the government is not taking the step or some steps are not right. Even in the entire energy transition plan, the Nigerian government is not thinking of doing away completely with the petrol or what you call it. For our hydrogen production by 2050, we still want to produce or use our natural gas or the natural resources, right, to produce. So I am saying this so that we consider the economic side of sustainability with the environment and the whole concept of energy transition. Nigeria, I think if we adopt this full scale of energy transition, it will affect our oil and gas, it will affect the natural resource that we have, and the country will not be economically viable. So that is my comment. Thank you.
I think
thank you for your comment. Before you address this, because that's a comment, and I know that there are a lot of people who are raring to say, you know, how realistic is this? I just have two questions, which you will treat together. The first is the question about, there's a question about the company you mentioned had a positive EBITDA. What's the name?
Thor Explorations.
How do you spell that?
Thor, T-H-O-R, Explorations.
Okay, so that's Peter Momo online.
They're listed on Canadian Stock Exchange.
Yeah, and
Australia.
someone needs to answer the question about viable prospects in mining. And then there's a question about the role of local governments. We've talked about federal government, we've talked about state government. The local governments recently won their independence from the states. I think, what was the date of independence for? On paper, at least, they were granted independence, Abi? To actualize independence, a different ballgame altogether. But now we need to give them responsibility. So over to you.
So I'll make a comment about CNG, then I'll answer the question about local government, since I'm really passionate about subnationals actually doing their job and not traveling to Dubai for retreats every time. I'm not, and we as a company, we're not against CNG. We're also, and you would find a number of players in the energy space, renewable energy space. We're also very pro diversify our energy mix. There's no doubt about that. We have to be able to do that. But there are two cardinal things that are wrong with the presidential initiative for CNG. They are propping it as an alternative, an immediate alternative to our very high PMS rates. And secondly, they're saying it's a transition fuel. Cardinally, as you do know, you're in the space, of course, there are a number of scientists, there are a number of analysts and economists who do not believe that gas of any form is a transition fuel. But in the context, let's just put it down in the context of Nigeria. In the context of Nigeria within the global space, since we do not contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions, our contributions are very minuscule. Secondly, since we are very energy vulnerable. Thirdly, since it's going to be really costly on our macroeconomic situation to just swift our transition directly into renewable sources like solar, especially seeing that it's still scaling, it's still in the scaling stage before we have solar power, for instance, become mainstream. Hydrogen is going to take maybe 70 years before it becomes mainstream. So all of these things, you cannot throw the cart without the horse in that context. So yes,
in the context of Nigeria within the globe, it needs to continue to maximize its gas utilization. I'm one of the biggest gas proponents in the country. But herein lies the problem. When you're propping CNG as an alternative to an alternative means of energy, especially with the high PMS prices, you have to look at the supply side and the demand side. It's pure economics. Supply side right now, we simply cannot meet 1% of our demand levels. If we unlock 1% of the folks who need energy for transportation in Nigeria, if we unlock it at current capacity, CNG cannot sort that out. And I highlighted a number of structural issues, right? Our pipeline infrastructure is not utilized, as minuscule as it is. We need about 10,000 kilometers of multi-product gas pipeline. An important, let me highlight this, an important section of the country is basically isolated. There's a gas appetite or gas infrastructure appetite towards the southeast. Right? They're not connected. Then capacity utilization for our existing 4,335 kilometer multi-product gas pipeline network. Capacity utilization is just 22%. Why? The pressure stations, all of those pressure stations just keep popping up the gas to move up north. The technology isn't there, and the infrastructure to back the technology isn't there yet. AKK has slacked or slugged behind in the last 3 years. We're supposed to have gotten AKK at 100% completion by now. But we still are yet to do that because a phenomenal, I would say a formidable partner in the finance, the Chinese, had to step out. Why? Because of graft. Folks were increasing, padding basically the costs, the cost of the infrastructure, the gas pipeline lane. I'm sure they're taking a trip through Kogi State to the southeast. You see those pipelines. That's those that we don't have enough supply to meet a very minuscule part of our demand. And then the presidency is propping up this particular energy means or energy source as an alternative. It's not right. What it does, and honestly, if you do pricing analysis as well, the differentials is still not steep enough or incentivizing enough for locals to want to switch or convert their cars. We know how expensive it is for conversions. Federal government will tell you that conversions are free. I'll tell you that anytime the federal government says the sky is blue, it's probably red. Don't believe what they say. That's just the honest truth. So we cannot allow them to push this mantra. We have to be able to use evidence. That's what we're here. That's why we set up the company. Continue to use evidence to aid policy making. If they want help, they should call us. We'll come and help them with the data. We'll help them with the programmatic design. We will ensure that we even change the way they're doing their public communications with regard to it. But it's still not enough. And I assure you, what we're doing is a very dangerous game that is going to cost our MSMEs dire situations from next year if we continue to prop up CNG as the major alternative. Apologies. So the second question is subnationals. I think for me, low-hanging fruits, I don't want to spend so much time talking. Low-hanging fruit here is core productive areas that our governments are involved in. And the data from the MBS agricultural census that was released some 2 months ago, together with data from the Food and Agriculture Organization, stipulates how much of food production activity is borne by our rural dwellers. So 90% of food production activity is carried out by rural smallholder farmers. 88% of our farming population are by these rural smallholder farmers. The low-hanging fruit here will basically be the best way for local government to be involved in governance is agricultural extension systems. They can create it themselves, but they will need to be upskilled because we have isolated them. Yesterday at the Agricultural Summit Africa, I asked a very important question. I asked, how many local government officials are in this very large hall, by the Congress Hall in Transcorp? There was no single local government official. I asked another question. How many agricultural extension workers are in this hall? I did not get up to 8 hands raised. I kid you not. So you see, there's a disequilibrium. The folks that actually need the agricultural extension services, the knowledge, the upskilling, the access to credit, they don't have the infrastructure that connects them to all of this, to the training and the upskilling. They do not have it. They're not trained. But the local government, with this financial freedom, we hope that actually pipelines into actual financial freedom, we hope that they can, by themselves, generate capacity to at least, the low-hanging fruit here is build their own respective agricultural extension systems. Trust me, when it comes to improved agronomic practices, we're going to see it. Trust me, when it comes to our very low productivity yield, when it comes to cereal production, for instance, we have very low productivity yield. I can compare us with South Africa. South Africa hover between 4,800 kilograms per hectare to 5,300 kilograms per hectare in cereal crop production. Nigeria is doing 1/4 of that. We're doing 1,300 kilograms to 1,400 kilograms. Data from FAO, by the way. So we're not, our farmers are not productive, and the bulk of them are in the local areas. One way to get them being productive is to help with their agronomic practices. Your seed spacing, how far apart are the seeds and the seedlings when you're planting them? They have to be closer, because the closer they are, the more you can get yields from 1 hectare, right? Second, the precision agriculture that is being applied, how many of them are actually tilling their lands with tractors? We have a very low tractorization rate, 5% mechanization rate. 5% of our agricultural activity is mechanized. I actually even doubt that number. Tractorization is even lower. Tractorization is around 3%. Then we have the single farming predicament, which for me is a huge problem, especially when you look at staples like rice. You cannot be farming rice just once a year. Irrigation farming has to do that. And the data that corroborates this structural problem is that only 3% of agricultural activity is in irrigation. So 97% of agricultural activity in Nigeria is one single season farming. We cannot improve our productivity yield. We cannot match our demand. We cannot prop up our supply without bridging these gaps. And the easiest low-hanging fruit here is once our local governments start to use their money to do their own self-capacity generation and build effective agricultural extension services, then we'll start to see good levels in 2 to 3 years.
Thank you. On mining, I think the way I would look at it is key factors locally and what's happening around the world. Again, like you said, we do not live on an island. What's happening around the world, there is a continued shift towards, or there is increased talk about the energy transition. There is increased shift towards more sustainable energy. Solar, wind, and other types of energy. And each one of these energy sources requires certain kind of metals. So if you're building an electric vehicle, you would need lithium for the battery, you would need cobalt. If you're building other types of energy sources, you would need things like copper. So there's been increased demand for what is now referred to as transition metals or green metals. So these are lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, and a couple of rare earth metals. Now the problem with this is that a lot of the production capacity and refining capacity is now owned by China. It's pretty much cornered that market. So other players in Europe and the US are looking for alternative sources. So if you go to a place like DR Congo, a lot of the mines now are owned by Chinese. And let's not even start to talk about our country. There's a lot happening for those who are in that space. But here's the thing, right? There's a lot of demand from other places. China is still looking for minerals. The US is looking for minerals. Europe is looking for minerals. Other places are looking for minerals. So there is a rush and significant demand for those metals. And those metals are not found everywhere. Luckily, Nigeria happens to be one of the few countries that has commercial quantity of some of these metals. So lithium, as we know, there's been the news about the Nasarawa lithium factory. But Nasarawa alone is not the only place with lithium. There are quantities in Kaduna, in Plateau, and as Basil said, in Oyo State. And there are probably other quantities around. So that's one prospect, or that's one of the factors driving this demand for metals, the global space, and the desire to get some level of independence from China being the only player in that space. Now, internally, I think there is no doubt now that there's been a desire for diversification, right? We are excessively dependent on oil. There is a need to diversify. We have these minerals. And until now, The mining sector contributes less than 1% to the GDP of Nigeria. Whereas for other countries, if you look at Ghana, you look at South Africa, and other places in Africa, the mining sector is the driver of the entire national economy. And we have these same minerals here. Ghana does gold. We have a lot of gold. South Africa does gold and iron ore. We have gold and iron ore in Nigeria, yet we're doing less than 1%. So in that sense, locally now, there are a lot of opportunities, and with the desire for diversification, I think there's a lot that we can do in that space. Of course, with the opportunities come some challenges. We've done very well with policy. On paper, our mining regulation is, I think, one of the best regulations I have seen of any sector in Nigeria. It's very clear on how you get licenses, what the royalty rates are, what you are required to do to sign a community development agreement. It's very clear on paper. But there are issues, of course. One is lack of data. So I can tell you that, we have a lot of lithium, and we do. But for an investor, the next question would be, what quantity are we talking about? How rich is this deposit? And, there's no clear information on that. Not from the federal government, not from the state government. If you go to the website of the mining ministry, you will see the same thing I am telling you. There is a lot of minerals. But then how much? We don't know. Where are these minerals? There's not a lot of information on that. So there is a data gap that currently exists that I hope will be filled. But that is something to keep in mind if you're looking to come in. You might have to do your own on-the-ground exploration and research, which are things that in other countries you would have base level information on these deposits, but you don't have that. So you have to be aware that if you're coming in, you may have to do your own research by yourself. The other thing is the menace of illegal mining, and all of the other things that happen in that sector. There's been some reports that nearly $10 billion worth of gold is exported from Nigeria annually, of which, we don't see it officially. So there's a lot happening. But notwithstanding that, I think there is no denying that there's a lot of opportunities, especially for green metals. And if you're willing to deal with the challenges, then, it's for you to take. Thank you.
Please, a louder round of applause. Sorry. Just 2 points. No, we're closing. We're closing. Anybody that wants to go into mining, please, there's a mine, there's a lithium mine outside Abuja here. It's about 30 kilometers from here, and you can go dig for lithium. I hear that a ton is about 7 million naira. Ladies and gentlemen, we've actually had a very long conversation, if I may say, and we've looked at the possibilities of Nigeria's economic future. We've looked at some of the factors that are within our control, the ones that are outside our control. But if you need more detail, please, and I hope someone can project the QR code for the report or the microsites for the report on the screen. If you need more details, please scan that QR code, download the full report, read it. And I think in that report, a lot of this is broken down, and so you will see, you'll be able to dig into the data. I thank you, incredible contributors to the report, and also incredible panelists today for guiding us through this thicket of issues. I also thank the audience for enduring, some of us, including Basil's, elongated responses. But, we're benefited from this conversation, and we hope to see you guys again soon. So we'll just stand in front of you guys here and take a picture while you watch us, and then we'll close the panel. Thank you. All right, please, another round of applause. Please, another round of applause, or else they won't leave the stage. Okay, so I think it's time for our vote of thanks. And it's Basil again who's going to give us, please, a round of applause.
I promise this won't take longer than 2 minutes, I promise. First and foremost, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who has contributed to making the Outlook and the Outlook launch event a success. I'll start with, first and foremost, the contributors, all of our technical colleagues, from the Senior Research Associate Victor Egono to our lead macroeconometric modeler, Dr. Esther Olanubi Olua Be Pelumi. I hope I didn't butcher that. I tried to get the Yoruba intonation in there. To Chisom Udora, who's been phenomenal with infrastructure provision, infrastructure insights provision. To my guy, I call him Charlie, Charles Asiegbu, all-rounder, top-notch policy analyst. To Dr. Chimere Hionu, who's currently doing his postdoctoral in Johannesburg, South Africa. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. He's actually the project lead. Please, a round of applause for him in absentia. I hope I'm not forgetting folks who wrote. Yeah, of course, I'm going there, because Mota is the managing director, so she's my boss. And like we say in Nigerian parlance, follow the woman, we submit the road. So she's my boss, of course. I will leave her for the last part. Massive shout out to Solomon Nkang, who is in Florida. Well, not Florida now, I've forgotten where he moved to. My friend and partner in this business together with Omotayo, many thanks for, he's actually the one who came up with the idea. So for folks who think that this is Basil's idea, no. He's actually the one who came up with the idea of an Outlook and then pushed for the idea of an Outlook launch so that we can meet, start building a knowledge community and share data as well and try and see how much of influence we can provide. I think we've started doing that. Today, I was on Channels, Business Morning, and the reach is quite wide, where I shared some excerpts of our macroeconomic outlook for 2025 to Nigerians. Hopefully that reach goes very far and beyond. When the link is put out in the next few minutes, we're hoping that as many people as possible are able to read that document. Tomorrow, the IMF will be doing the original Outlook launch in Lagos. I'm sure there'll be a lot of cross-corroboration. They are an international partner when it comes to that sort of macroeconometric modeling, and we're a local partner. And if you notice, and also if you listen really attentively, we added a lot of local nuance to the empirics that we did. That, for us, is our ethos as a company, to always provide local context that your IMFs and your World Banks simply cannot provide from the stable conditions of either Abuja or Washington or Paris. Now, moving forward, I want to say a big thank you to all of our designers. Akim Menasera John, Divine Noye. I want to thank our data analyst, Michael Adeniro. I want to thank Soma Agiosali and the entire UXC design team for making the fiscal documents a reality, especially Adedeji, who is his partner in the business as well. I hope I don't forget folks, I really hate it. I want to thank, it's part of my personal ethos to always return with thanks no matter what. So I return with thanks to everyone that my brain might be forgetting. And then, of course, our partners across the media stations that are here fiscally, Channels for enabling us at least 15 minutes of their time to share some excerpts of that. There are far more appearances we're going to make in our press run with regards to the Outlook. I just said yes to one. I think that's all right. I'll fully confirm when I go back to my phone. But yeah, you're going to see a lot of our faces, from Victor to Charles to myself. You're going to see our faces from now until March, because normally when you bring out Outlooks, it's always in use till the end of Q1 of the next year. So you're going to see our faces, webinars. I'm going to be in Lagos by the end of the month. So if you know anyone in Lagos who wants to listen to our Outlook presentation, please reach them at no cost. Solomon is going to kill me if I say at no cost. But yeah, this is what we love doing. We love crystallizing knowledge, making it accessible to the public, and also trying to inform policy making for better outcomes for the people. I end my Thanksgiving by saying a big thank you to all of you here who made it fiscally. It's really difficult, especially since it's a work weekday, but thank you so much. I see a lot of faces that are really, really, really dear to me. My best friends are here, my best acquaintances and colleagues are here. Some of the folks that I met just yesterday are here. I want to say thank you for honoring it. My mother, I'll tell you a story just to an icebreaker. My mother actually flew from Yola this morning to come and surprise me. I had no idea she was going to come. No idea. Of course, can you guess what I did? I was crying, lots of tears. That's a bit. I'm a very emotional guy, and I embrace my emotions very comfortably, by the way. It's a natural thing, and I think we should be able to go out of heteronormative masculinity in that regard. So yeah, I enjoyed the tears, and I'm sure my mom enjoyed seeing her boy in tears. The story about my mom is simple. Anytime I have something to do, she makes an appearance. From my football sessions, she's there, to when I was sworn in as student union government, she was there. It's a great example of parenting, and the work that we're doing would not be possible without her as well. I want to say a big thank you to someone very dear to me, Dr. Nkang. He's here. Fiscally, Dr. Nkang is the uncle to Solomon Nkang, who's the founder of Veriv Africa, by the way. Please a round of applause for him. I see a lot of friendly faces. Roving Heights, who loves Roving Heights? Wow, you have fans, sir. The co-founder of Roving Heights is here. Please do stand up and receive the accolades. Yeah. I have to personally tell you, my intellectual development is nothing to write home about, especially since I moved to Abuja in 2017. My intellectual development is nothing without Roving Heights. Nothing without them. In fact, most of my money goes to them. I know my mom always keeps wondering where my money goes to. Yeah, it's them. I'm sure you're thinking, women? No. Books actually take the bulk of my money. And then after that is food, and then after that is black tax, and then after that I pay tax to the federal government. Because I know next year they're going to come after me with higher taxes, both personal and of course our own payee taxes we have to pay. To the audience on the internet, those live streaming, those on YouTube, all of our friends who couldn't make it and had to just plug in, all of our friends on LinkedIn, especially most of the FBI guys from London. I know that Africa Reports, some of their reporters from Paris are online now. I'm sure they must have just left for other work. We want to say a big thank you, Veriv Africa. Veriv Africa wants to say a big thank you. I cannot forget our volunteers. Please, a round of applause for our volunteers. They made it happen. They made it happen, even though my sister wants me to pay her for all of our worries here. Don't worry, I'll pay you. I'm going to sponsor your trip to Accra in December. Yeah. But yeah, a big thank you to all of the volunteers, all of our vendors, cameramen, my very good senior brother and friend, Jomi, photography. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody at the back end, everyone who makes it happen without showing their face. Too numerous to mention, but please, Veriv Africa is incredibly, we are incredibly grateful. Our ethos as a company, again, basically sort of a combination of my belief system, Omotayo's belief system, and then Solomon's belief system. We're very pro people, we're very pro network. Most of our contributors are within our knowledge network, and we make sure that we pay high rate levels for that sort of knowledge. We do this because we know how tough it is for knowledge producers in Nigeria. So we're very pro people, we're very pro workers, as you do know, of course. Still a leftist, by the way, even though I'm a former Marxist. I will always be for the people and always for the people. I will leave the last bit of thanks to Amara Nwangpa, Mr. Amara Nwangpa, our anchor for today. Please, a round of applause for him. A round of applause for him. I know he gave me some very good coaching yesterday, telling me how to make sure I don't speak too long, but sometimes the DNA just reinforces itself. You know, I come from a people group who are known as authoritarians, but unfortunately they're very terrible in politics. My grandfather, for instance, brought the great Nigerian National People's Party to Akwa Ibom, or Old Cross River State, and when he vied for State House of Assembly of the Old Cross River State. He lost. I only got 1 vote. I think my mother said that the entire household, they still found a way, because the entire household came out to vote for him, but only 1 vote was counted then in the 1979 elections, by the way. So, very great orators, but they're always losing elections. But I assure you we're going to win elections moving forward when I run for office in 2027. So a huge thank you to all of you. Mr. Amara, again, thank you so much. Thank you for your patience, understanding. I know I've gone way over time, but thank you. So intelligent, one of the top development guys we have in Nigeria, top tier policy analyst. Also supports the same football team that I support, so he's my guy for life. A happy birthday to Chris Nwadike. Today is his birthday and he came. Asked a very brilliant question. That's my brother. When I was suicidal, he was there for me. Please a round of applause for him as well. Yes, I was suicidal, wanted to kill myself at some point, but he was there, gave me full moral support. I was the best man to my best friend, Kingsley Jima Celestine, had to come from Leipzig just for this. Please a round of applause for him. My seatmate from secondary school is here, Kelu, who is also the music founder, label and publishing company founder here. I worked with a number of top Nigerian stars, including Mr. Easy. And then I'll leave the last beat for Omotayo Jemima Faro and Solomon Inkag. Without you, without your vision, without your resourcing, without your skill set, without your patience, you have to be patient when you're working with me. And without, of course, your candor, your honesty, and hard work, we will not be here. Thank you so much. Thank you to every single body here. Everybody who's here, thank you. Thank you to those in the, who are live streaming. Please read, share on your social media platforms. Use the microsite, by the way. The microsite is very interactive. You can share every single chart that you want to put out there. All of our projections, all of our scenario and assumptions. For instance, those folks who want to tell their friends that the dollar is going to be 2,000 naira next year, you can actually share it to the WhatsApp groups and say, oh boy, let's start our Japa moves, you know. But yeah, please use our microsite very well. Like I said, you're going to see our faces from now until March 2025. Thank you so much and have a great time out there. Don't forget, there's lunch is served upstairs here.